see. I don't see too many more people jumping on, but why don't we get started? Everyone, can everybody hear me all right? Yes, nod some heads. Yes, all right, Mr. Michael Ponce, thank you for, Jasmine, thank you for clarifying. As you guys all know, Marcel Rodardi will not be here today. He is out in Disneyland celebrating his daughter Ellie. She just turned 15 years old today. So they're out there celebrating. So he asked if I would take over some of the technical stuff. All right, we see we're at there like 45 people, I think. So why don't we start it off? I'm going to kick it off over to our mayor, mayor and president, Lindsay Horvath. Just a quick story. Lindsay is so super connected. She knows everybody. And we're out in Washington, D.C., and we, this group of about 100 mayors from all over the country, we go and we meet with the president at the time, President Barack Obama. And, you know, she has such a presence. She's just so amazing. And the president's like looking around the room and he's like, points at her and says, "Young lady, how old are you?" And that's how Lindsay became best friends with President Barack Obama. But with that, I'm going to kick it off to our mayor and president, Lindsay Horvath.
That's an interesting interpretation of what happened. Thank you, Jorge, for the introduction. And I'm really, really glad to present to you our panel today. Today is my last official duties as president of California Contract Cities Association. I know Marcel's really in denial about that, and that's why he's not here today. But we're all very excited for our incoming president, Mark Warnick, and the vision that he will have to continue the great work of contract cities. I want to say once again, thank you to all of our executive board members who have been committed to our work this year. And I couldn't be happier that the last thing I get to do is welcome this panel discussion today. I'm just so thrilled that we're able to have this conversation. I've heard on numerous occasions inquiries around how we can get information like what's about to be shared, and what resources are available to help cities, and especially right now with our budgets being taxed, no pun intended, because of COVID-19. We need all the help we can get, and luckily with this panel, help is on the way. So I will introduce our speakers, and then I will turn it over to our illustrious moderator for today, my dear friend Jasmine Canick, who provides government affairs expertise to D.R. Welch attorneys at law. Ms. Canick has worked at all levels of government, including Congress, the California Assembly, and for several city and county governments, including 5 mayors. Most recently, she served as an advisor to the president of the Los Angeles City Council. She's an all-around badass, so if you have questions about how to get things done, Ms. Canick is the person to call. David Welch has a broad wealth of experience representing governmental and private clients in the United States, Canada, Europe, South America, and the Caribbean as it relates to the laws regulating cannabis. Over the last 12 years, his practice has developed an expertise in laws regulating the cannabis industry. Mr. Welch serves as special counsel to the cities of El Monte and Compton in the areas of cannabis regulation and municipal cost recovery. Mr. Welch currently holds the position of managing partner of D.R. Welch Attorneys at Law. Aluya I. Imoisili is the head of the litigation department of D.R. Welch Attorneys at Law. Mr. Imoisili is a seasoned commercial litigator who represents Fortune 500 companies, large financial institutions, hedge funds, private equity firms, insurance and reinsurance companies, and executives in high-profile bet-the-company litigation and arbitration throughout the United States. And Damon M. Brown is the city attorney for the City of Compton, where, as the chief legal officer for the city, he leads an office of attorneys and staff who advise the city council and all city officers in matters pertaining to their offices, represent the city in civil litigation and code enforcement matters, prosecute municipal code violations, review all bonds and contracts, and bring affirmative litigation to protect the rights of consumers and citizens. Mr. Brown was appointed to the seat of city attorney by the Compton City Council on August 1st, 2019. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Brown provided advice and counsel to and represented private and public employers, including the City of Compton, in all phases of federal and state litigation, in labor negotiations, and before administrative and regulatory bodies. For more than 13 years, he has practiced law at some of the most prestigious private law firms in the state of California and indeed the nation. And finally, last but certainly not least, Ms. Alma K. Martinez is currently serving as the city manager for the city of El Monte in the county of Los Angeles. In this capacity, she is responsible for the day-to-day operations and responsibilities of a city with 115,000 residents, 300 employees, and an annual budget of $165.2 million. Ms. Martinez is the first woman and the first Latina to serve as city manager in the city of El Monte. We are so proud of that. And this illustrious panel, I just couldn't be more excited that you all are from our contract cities and representing the best of what we can do when we work together. So thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to Jasmine.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to the members for inviting us to speak with you all today. As Mayor Horvath said, my name is Jasmine Kanik, and I do government affairs for D.R. Welch Attorneys at Law. I think we have a pretty interesting presentation for you. I don't know how much of a moderator I'll be, because the way we worked it out was that we all are going to kind of breeze through and do our part. And we were going to start off today's presentation with a quick video, a news clip. I'm not sharing the screen. I think it's David supposed to be sharing it.
I am, and I'm just, again, at the best of times, trying to get it uploaded. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. It's like it was working perfect earlier, right?
Typically how it happens. So let me play this.
Let me know if you want me to just go on, if it won't play.
We'll play the video. If you can just go on, I'll fix this issue.
Okay. So this is what I'll do. I'll tell you what the video was going to be. All right. The video was going to be a news clip of a community here in Southern California. I believe the community was Welch. And it was community activists and neighbors who had gotten together to hold a protest over illegal dispensaries, cannabis dispensaries in their neighborhood, and what was happening to their neighborhood, they felt because of that. So because of what all of you do, I don't need to tell you that, the black market for cannabis is thriving here in California and basically has eclipsed the legal market. That's obviously because they charge lower prices, they don't pay state taxes, they don't abide by the state regulations, and that includes testing and security requirements. The cannabis sold in these stores do not meet the established standards. They evade state testing, and they put people at risk. Not to mention, they increase crime, devalue property, and they discourage commercial investments. And for cities, that's really important.
And I have the video now, Jasmine.
Okay, great.
Play it.
A group of churchgoers in Watts out on the street today protesting an illegal pot store.
CBS 2's Joy Benedict tells us neighbors say the business is attracting more crime to their neighborhood.
Shut it down! It was a short walk with a lot of meaning. Dozens of members of the Watts community came together to march in unity, one foot in front of the other, hoping to pave a better path for their neighborhood.
We don't want you here.
They are protesting a marijuana dispensary behind this metal door. It closed up when workers heard the march was coming.
You see some of them just smoking or doing any type of drugs right in front of you.
Giovanna Elizalda is just 16 years old. She is the exact part of this community these protesters say they are trying to protect.
It's unsafe anyway. We have enough problem without that place.
Many here say they have seen illegal activity outside in the year this business has been here, and police say robberies have increased.
They snatched him out the car and they jumped on him and stuff and took those little medical containers that the weed be in.
The march was organized by two different churches in the area. Leaders say it's not medicinal marijuana they are against. It's this store. They say it isn't a good neighbor.
They don't care about what goes on out here. They just care about what goes on in there.
The LAPD was also on hand to help block the street for the community to protest. Officers say they just raided the dispensary Friday. Officers say it is an illegal operation, but despite making several arrests, it reopened the next morning.
A lot of times the judges issue them small fines and they're out the next day. I mean, from what I understand, the dispensary is making over $20,000 a day profit.
Another issue for this community is the proximity of the store to the metro station, which is just maybe a block or so away. Folks are concerned because everyone has to walk past this area to get where they're going.
They're kind of intimidated by walking through that area.
But there was no fear today. Despite an attempt by counter-protesters, things went smoothly, and this group hopes the owner and lawmakers get the message. They want this door to stay closed for good. Joy Benedict, CBS 2 News. A group of churchgoers in.
Wow. All right. Okay. So that's the video. And I'll just quickly add this. Last year, before I left the city of Los Angeles, one of the last things that I did as an advisor to then Council President Herb Wesson was I worked with a constituent whose son had gone missing. And it turned out that her son had been working in an illegal dispensary, and she didn't know, and he didn't know that the dispensary was an illegal dispensary in South Los Angeles. And months later, when his body was found, it was determined by the LAPD that the people who ran the dispensary had murdered him and took his body out to the desert and buried him and killed him. And we still don't know exactly why. And that mother was so distraught. Actually, the LA Times recently, I think it was in March, they did a huge article on the mother's fight and what happened to her son. If you want, you should look it up. It was really interesting. Like I said, it was in the South LA in the 8th district of LA. But besides illegal dispensaries, we have another issue in California, and that's hold on, and that's illegal meth labs, which California is seeing a proliferation of. And you know, some of the chemicals that are used to produce meth in these labs are, as we know, drain cleaners, alcohol, paint thinners, acid, antifreeze, over-the-counter cold medicines. They produce 5 to 6 pounds of toxic waste for every pound of meth that is manufactured in these labs. And the leftover chemicals from these products are often poured down the drains. They go into the plumbing, they go into the storm drains. They eventually end up on the ground, and they can remain in the soil and the groundwater for years. So even if the lab doesn't explode, when the waste from the meth labs are not cleaned up properly, it gets into our drinking water, our playgrounds, motel rooms, other public spaces. And so boarded up, burnt out former meth labs can negatively affect property values as well in surrounding neighborhoods. And the same with illegal dispensaries. Where there's meth, there's crime. We know that the National Association of Counties conducted a survey of 500 law enforcement agencies in 45 states, and a majority of them reported that meth was the #1 drug problem for their county. An even larger majority reported meth to be the driving force behind an increase in all types of crimes, including domestic abuse, child abuse, robberies, burglaries, assaults, identity theft. So meth labs and illegal cannabis dispensaries are clearly a significant threat to our communities, and traditional solutions and remedies, they aren't working anymore. So that's what we're here to talk about.
So one of the things we were talking about is traditional solutions, and those have changed significantly over the years. As everyone knows, cannabis and adult use cannabis is now legal in the state of California, despite it being illegal under federal law. What that has done, and what we've seen it's done for cities and also law enforcement, is sort of disincentivize the enforcement or the ability to enforce, because those crimes, which were once felonies, are now misdemeanors. Not only that, but the people breaking the crimes, or people illegally cultivating and selling marijuana, or selling meth, or selling other types of drugs, they really do not care about the enforcement, because they're just going to go and do it somewhere else. So what we're seeing a lot of is that you have what they call the whack-a-mole principle. Illegal operators that are operating, getting shut down, and then reoperating either at the same location or down the street, and not just for dispensaries, but also for production. And I think a lot of the frustration we've seen as attorneys helping police departments or to help sheriff departments is that they're frustrated because of the whack-a-mole principle, and a lot of times the fact that the crimes that they're now enforcing against are misdemeanors. The way that it used to work was that once you charge someone with a felony, they would eventually go to jail or they would be prosecuted. And of course, that would limit the incentive for them to return. But when charged with a misdemeanor, for those that were already committing felonies, the misdemeanor seems like less of a disincentive or incentive to stop doing the wrong thing. Not only that, but it's become much harder to go after the core of the problem. And for us, what we've done and focused on the core, what we believe is the soft spot in prosecuting or helping to enforce the laws for the city, and those are the landlords and the banks. Currently, criminal enforcement against landlords is non-existent unless the landlord's actively participating, both on a federal level as well as on a state level. And so what we've done is found a way to actually focus on the monetary enforcement or monetary collection from landlords, as well as those banks that help finance the landlord's operation or allow the landlords to provide safe harbor for the illegal operators or narcotics operators. So as stated, we pursue penalties not only against the landlords, not only against the operators, but also the financiers, the banks, the ones that hold the mortgages on those properties. Because, and Aluya will talk to this more in the following slides about the law behind our strategy, but we found that to be a great pressure point in order to get the landlords to comply, to make sure locations are no longer used, and to get quick compliance. Because when you start going after their pocketbook, the reason they're renting to illegal businesses is because they're usually getting paid a higher amount rent than they would from a typical business. But when you start going after their pocketbook, you tend to see compliance much quicker. One of the things that we also focus on is making sure that all of the law enforcement expenses, including the investigation and the enforcement or execution of search warrants, as well as the city code enforcement's time in prosecuting or in investigating these illegal operations, is also recovered. And there's certain laws that actually apply directly to landlords that we're able to recover from what they call the deep pockets, or those individuals that have the monetary or the money to lose. The way it works a lot of times, and I know that City Manager Martinez will talk more about this, is that Sheriff's Department and police departments and code enforcement share this information after a enforcement action or an execution of a search warrant with the law firm or the city attorney. Once we identify who the operators are, as well as the owners of the property, as well as the banks and or lenders, we then will file litigation against those individuals in Superior Court to collect the damages. And we call damages the cost of enforcement, all of the overtime hours law enforcement puts in, all the time the code enforcement did, all the, in one case, we had to call hazmat out to actually clean the location of a marijuana manufacturing operation, which many of you know could be volatile, could be explosive. So the cost of hazmat was then billed to the landlord, and we were able to recover that against the landlord. And so I'm going to pass it to Aluya to talk, Mr. Moisley, to talk about the law and how we're able to do that in our enforcement actions.
Thanks, David. And so one of the things to know as people who are running cities is, and city attorneys trying to get into this space and make sure to deal with the evildoers as well as recover costs for the city, is that your hands are not tied by the law. You have very, very wide latitude to go into these operations and ensure compliance with the law and disincentives from these marijuana businesses or meth houses and so on from doing what they're doing under the civil code, so to speak. There was a case a few years ago by the city of Riverside against a group of medical marijuana dispensaries that the Supreme Court came down and said, look, it doesn't matter that you can operate legally on a federal level. Each city can have their own enforcement action against you if you're not complying with that city's including ban on these kinds of businesses. In real life, just last year, a case came down from the appellate court, the People v. Brom case, where the city of LA was suing actual owners of a series of dispensaries and obtained a judgment of $6 million against them in penalties for operating these businesses for a period of time. The appeals court upheld that and said, yes, that's okay. It's not a violation of the Constitution. And as owners, you have to be vigilant about the people that you rent to or that you allow on premises to conduct these operations. And so we've seen this in practice, in our practice as well, that this is a very, it's a very fruitful approach for addressing these kinds of businesses. And a lot of cities are beginning to wake up and see that this is an approach, and this is a new approach, a novel approach that works. On the next slide, for instance, we have City Manager Martinez in El Monte, where they have actual municipal codes addressing certain of these kinds of businesses and outlawing activity in that jurisdiction that's unlicensed, and also imposing their own penalties and remedies for the city that allow the city to recoup their costs, as well as penalize the owners, the mortgagees, the banks, anyone who could even have their hands involved in this kind of business, so that those people themselves are disincented from even permitting this kind of business to occur in the neighborhood. This is a sample of El Monte's code, for instance, just so people can take a look at what people, other cities are doing. On the next slide, we have other sources of law that provide remedies to the city on top of just cost recoveries that Mr. Welch referred to earlier. For instance, in Compton also has, and Mr. Brown can talk about that in a few seconds. They also have a municipal code that imposes up to $1,000 per day fine on owners and operators of illegal businesses. The California Business and Professions Code is another source that imposes, on top of that $1,000 per day in the city, $2,500 per act per day penalty on wrongdoers, including the owners and banks and so on. The Health and Safety Code, which also addresses controlled substances, imposes up to a $25,000 fine, plus additional fines and remedies to the city. California Civil Code that deals with public nuisances, provides for injunctive relief, can actually shut down and prevent that particular location from ever conducting certain businesses and from ever selling without letting the city know, so the city can be more vigilant about what's happening at that premises, and has other remedies, including the recovery of the city's attorney's fees and even their litigation costs for getting to that point. I think this might be a good time to pass it on to Mr. Brown to talk about what the City of Compton is doing.
Thank you. Good afternoon now, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I do have to take just a quick moment of personal privilege to recognize Miss Alma Martinez, whom I have not seen in several years since she was the assistant city manager here in Compton and I was serving as outside counsel. So it is great to see that the residents of El Monte have such a great, exceptional leader in their city. I'm honored again to be here to share some of the issues that the City of Compton faces with regard to marijuana in the city. The voters spoke loud and clear back in 2016 or 13 that they did not want cannabis in the City of Compton. And ever since then, it has been, to say that it's been a challenge is to put it quite mildly, in keeping marijuana out of the city. The City of Compton currently has approximately 20 illegal dispensaries that are in operation. And our greatest challenge in really addressing the issue has been the whack-a-mole problem that David mentioned before. We have a code enforcement division that goes and will red tag buildings, board them up within hours. Those boards are taken down and the businesses are back in operation. And without a police force of our own, we don't have the resources to maintain a law enforcement presence to ensure that once those even when the sheriff goes in on a warrant and shuts down a dispensary, we don't have our own mechanism to ensure the follow-up that's necessary to ensure that these dispensaries are closed. One of the things that we have been implementing is to go in and get administrative warrants when the sheriff does go in to do a marijuana closing, to find building and safety violations that would justify the issuance of a warrant, which will give us a 14-day period after that warrant is served to come back to the property and ensure that it is not being operated. But once again, without sufficient resources and our code enforcement officers are unarmed, again, we would need the cooperation of the sheriff to do that, and we don't always have that. So I was certainly searching for another way to beef up our enforcement mechanism because this is an issue in the city that residents are quite vocal quite regularly about it, and as they should be, because it does, everything that Jasmine mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is something that does flow from the operation of illegal cannabis dispensaries in a city. It does impact safety. We have some of these that are right next and across the street from elementary schools. It does discourage investment in business. And so we really, not only because it is, in our municipal code that this is outlawed, but just to enhance the progress of the city and to continue down that path, it's critical that we get a better handle on the enforcement of our ordinance. And so I was happy to be introduced by our mayor to David Welch, whose firm will provide the services for us that have been outlined. A lot of the owners of properties where cannabis dispensaries are operating in the city of Compton are owned by individuals who own other businesses in the city of Compton. For example, we have one gentleman who owns about 5 different properties in the city. 4 of those properties are currently, cannabis dispensaries are being operated out of those properties, but he also owns and operates a very popular ARCO station. And so we are in the process now of having a business license revocation hearing before the city council to revoke the license of his ARCO station in order to prompt some action for him to regulate his own tenants in those illegal dispensaries that are operating in the city. That's one strategy that we plan to go forward with in trying to address this problem. But certainly to the extent that these owners can be held accountable for the various penalties and fees that are associated with the cost recovery plan that DR Welch implements, I think that that will be a significant deterrent to these business owners in the city who have other legitimate businesses that are profitable to them, that they will then be at risk for significant financial penalty should they not take a more proactive role in trying to regulate their own tenants. And so I'm very excited about this relationship. It is new, and we are going to, we look forward to making this a central part of our overall strategy in tackling this very pervasive issue in our city.
Thank you. If I could introduce, and everyone knows City Manager Martinez, to talk about El Monte and what they're doing with their cannabis issue.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. I'm also going to take a point of personal privilege and acknowledge my mayor, who's also in attendance, Mayor Jessica Ancona, who's also in attendance today's workshop. So I'm Alma Martinez, City Manager for the City of El Monte. I'm going to just briefly go through what my city looks like. We're 13 miles east of downtown LA, and we're about 9.6 square miles, 115,000 people, and we have diverse land uses in the city. So since we're talking about cannabis, cannabis was approved, and this is the timeline of the approval process. Starting in October 2019, there was a group of residents that submitted an initiative and to allow the legal operations. On November 2019, this initiative was certified by LA County. Moving to December 3rd of 2019, City Council voted and approved the measure as an ordinance without any alteration. In January of this last year, the ordinance became effective, and on March 3, 2020, the city put forth its own initiative, which was approved by over 70% of the residents that voted on a special tax for cannabis. What is permitted in the city? The permitted uses include medicinal and adult use cannabis, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing, and a cap of 6 retail businesses. So the methodology as to why the City Council moved in the direction of holding illegal cannabis operators responsible through their landlords is as most of the presentation has covered, the property impacts, right? You have property impacts that pose a direct threat to public health, the safety, substandard building conditions, odors, and just overall health hazards. Also, the increase in crime. I'm going to go through all the different monies that were recovered and all the different drugs also recovered, not just cannabis, during this enforcement process through our police department. Also, the increase in crimes such as home invasion, robberies, assault, homicides, they happen substantially more frequently in around properties where these illegal cannabis operations are being held. So let's talk about the illegal cannabis activity. Some data from 2018 and 2019. The El Monte Police Department seized about 20,000 plants and ready for sale product, 1,800 pounds. We have edibles, gummy bears and food and the like, 48 pounds. Vape pens, about 21,000. Wax, 351 pounds, and that's incredibly expensive and very valuable on the market. There's also codeine that was seized, 240 ounces, cocaine, and methamphetamines. If we go into the value, right, of the illegal cannabis seized, you have $3.6 million. The vape pens, it's a lot of money. The wax, as I explained to you, incredibly expensive. And in regards to the overtime, it's also a burden on our staffing, right? On overtime for police department and code enforcement and staffing overall. So we had about $80,000 in overtime for illegal cannabis enforcement since January 2018. So it's also a drag on our city budget. And this is an actual map of the city. The blue dots are the schools. The 2018 cannabis investigations are the orange dots. And then, on 2019, you can see more or less an increase as well. So how does this coordinated effort work? So the City Council engaged with Mr. Welch's firm to work in conjunction with the El Monte Police Department and U.S. Attorney's Office, DEA, and also some private investigators. And together they identified owners, operators, landlords of these illegal dispensaries and cultivation sites and other businesses in the city. And they, as Mr. Welch went through, they obtained the injunctions, they enforced penalties, and then from there, if we can go to the next slide, the illegal use of properties. Also, they work with the El Monte Police Department in going after the property owners. And they also have additional scopes with the city to assist, since this is their specialty, and in other commercial cannabis application issues. And as we go forth, I know some of the council members and some of my colleagues want to know, and city attorneys, well, has this actually paid off for the city? So has this program, this innovative program that the city council and their forward thinking approved? So the answer is yes. Currently, the city has collected about $300,000 over the past year from this program, and an additional $200,000 is under investigation, with a total of about $500,000, which will result in about $325,000 in recovery to the city. So this program is something that definitely is paying off, is helping with the drain in our general fund and police overtime and the like, to not only secure the safety of our residents, but also add additional funding and replenish some of the losses we receive from illegal cannabis operators. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alma. I think I'm supposed to turn it over to Lindsay, Mayor Horvath.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I'm so grateful for your presentation. Thank you for sharing. And that last slide, I think we'll be able to make your contact information available to everyone to make sure they're able to follow up with you directly as to the needs of their cities. I know in our city, we went through a very thorough vetting process on cannabis operators in our city, but yet we are seeing on the border of our city, just right outside that border, something happening in another city that's impacting neighborhoods. And it's good to know that there are folks out there who are really trying to address the bad operators, you know, and especially the illegal operators in this issue. It's very, very important. Have you found that there have been best practices that that cities have adopted in terms of vetting businesses and having that create different outcomes? Or are you seeing that illegal operators are kind of popping up everywhere, regardless of whether a city had a vetting process for cannabis operators?
I'll take that one. I find that the illegal operators, many of them, and what we found through our investigation and work with law enforcement, they're not focused as much on the legal market as the illegal market. California accounts for a lot of the illegal cannabis throughout the country and sometimes the world, believe it or not. So what you find is they actually focus on cities that do not allow for legal operations because they believe that by going in there, there's less eyes on them. So for instance, cities with large industrial areas will have more grow operations or manufacturing operations than a city that has legal operation established. So the illegal operators have no regard for the law. And so they actually find cities, regardless of whether the city has a law or not, they look for cities that they feel are opportunities where they can hide their operation clandestinely and operate and then generate this money and cannabis to be sold on the illicit market.
And what are some of the things that you've noticed, or have there been particular indicators of that kind of operation that could tip a city off that something like that is going on?
You know, there's a lot of visual indicators that law enforcement uses. For instance, air conditioning running in the middle of the winter, windows that have foil on them to reflect the light or keep the light out. Power usage tends to be a good indicator of an illegal operation. For dispensaries, frankly, they're retail operations. So many people see the dispensary, they're aware of the dispensary. And so seeing, use of these medical containers or vials that we saw in the video earlier, finding that at schools, finding that around the neighborhood is indication that marijuana is illegally being sold as well. I find from what we've talked to many cities and what during our assistance with the police department, their investigation, we find that a lot of cities with large industrial areas where there's a good amount of power tend to be the targets for the illegal operators that want to set up their clandestine operations. Less cities that have large residential or commercial areas, but cities with industrial areas tend to be the target.
If anyone has questions, you can use the raise hand function that's in the reactions button, or just let us know that you'd like to, you can indicate in the chat what your question is as well, if you prefer to do it that way. We want to make sure we're able to get all of your questions answered. Have you found, you mentioned the presence of other illegal drugs in these operations. Would you say that's, that happens very frequently, or is that, or are there certain circumstances that contribute to other illegal substances being available in illegal cannabis operations?
And I found, looking at the different reports and looking at analysis of the different enforcement actions, that you'll find other types of illicit drugs, whether it's cocaine, whether it's meth, or whether it's other, other types of drugs in about 25 to 40% of the cases we've seen. There tends to be other types of illegal drugs or large sums of money, or they lead to other types of criminal activity by the operators or people related to the operators.
And if other people have additional responses, feel free to jump in. I think another question I'm curious about is how have you found cooperation with local law enforcement as these issues have come up? And, have they been a partner in your efforts? Or have they been an obstacle in your efforts? If you could talk a little bit about what that looks like.
And I'll jump in. Our experience with local law enforcement is actually great. We work directly with the chief. We're going to be working with the captain in Compton, and they sort of invite us in. For us, what we do not need anything that is confidential or something that is, within the grasp of law enforcement. We simply need a police report, and we simply need to know how many hours they've expended in executing their warrants or their investigation. Our job, and we say this to the chiefs or the captains, is simply to get your money back for you. And the money that you spent on enforcing against illegal operation, we're just there to recover it. That's why we call it municipal cost recovery. And so they're very supportive of us. I mean, I had to email back and forth with a sergeant in Almonte, very responsive, great law enforcement officer, and has been very supportive of our efforts and gave us anything we need. On the other hand, we've also been very supportive. We've assisted in pointing out or helping educate, based on our experience in the industry, what is going on in some of the locations. I recall one time helping in, or actually showing up to an ongoing investigation and pointing out, which the police were aware of, but pointing out how this operator, this person that was recently subject to a search warrant, was more likely than not distributing out of state because of shipping labels, or the way they operated indicated to us that they were operating and sending the cannabis out of state, and also assisted them in putting the connection between the operator at the location and websites that the operator was putting out there. So it's been a very good relationship.
Great. I see Councilmember Hilton has a question that sort of sounds a lot like what we experience in West Hollywood, for cities that want to welcome cannabis into their communities in the right way. How do you avoid a lot of the troubles that you're seeing in terms of the illegal market, its impacts on cities? How do you break the stigma and differentiate legal operators who are trying to follow the law versus those who are trying to skirt the law, or even worse, and do other things? How do you differentiate that and bring in those good operators in the right way?
have something to say on that. I know David's gonna have something, but I think that's a great question, Councilmember Hilton. One of the things for people who follow LA, a big issue with us in LA is social equity, right? And making sure that the communities who were the most impacted by the war on drugs also have an opportunity to take advantage of the opportunities that are available in this new area. And so as a city, as you start to think about, if you're starting to think about it, I encourage you to also take that into consideration as well. So when you talk about breaking the stigma, particularly in communities of color, that is very important. Like, making sure that that community, that the community that was affected the most by the war on drugs, particularly, we know that people were arrested for having less than an ounce of weed on them at one point in time. And so making sure that those communities are able to participate in the process. In the beginning here in Los Angeles, I know David can speak to this, we had some bumps in the road dealing with that, but now it looks like we're trying to sort of get there, and that's a big focus for our Department of Cannabis here in LA. And like I said, I worked for Herb Wesson, and he was a huge part of what we have going on here in LA, period, with cannabis.
I'll add something as well. We've found with the legalization and the court cases that Mr. Amoisley referred to earlier, that it's a lot easier to identify illegal operators. And I'll say this, illegal cannabis operators do no good for the legal cannabis market. The less, if not eliminate them, would be the best thing for the legal cannabis market and the best thing for the city or the cities that choose to allow legal operations, because the cities are then able to reap in or obtain or collect all of the tax dollars that should be going to that city. And so the two lines, those two groups should not be blurred. Legal operators are legal. As we all know, they're now it's big business, it's Wall Street business, but they're following the law and they're paying their taxes and they're making sure they work with the communities to integrate into the community. Illegal operators, regardless of whether you have a legal law in your city, are not good participants, not good community members, and they share no taxes with the city. So there's a big distinction. And if you go after illegal operators, the line should not be blurred with the community, that you're actually enforcing against those that are following the law. And so I say that by going after illegal operators, that should definitely be a city's focus, because they're only doing harm not only to the city, but also to the extent the legal cannabis industry.
Yes, I know Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer was putting forth some effort in this regard not too long ago, and I think was very interested in being aggressive in terms of shutting down the illegal operators for all of the reasons that you're talking about. They don't create an environment that helps people distinguish, and if you allow them to continue to operate or don't try to enforce against them, they can be confused as by the public as legal operations, and then kind of become the face of your cannabis program unintentionally. Jasmine?
Yeah, I just also wanted to add that while cannabis is obviously a huge issue, illegal cannabis dispensaries are a huge issue, so are the proliferation of meth labs. How many times have we turned on the television to find out this house just exploded out of nowhere and decimated an entire neighborhood, right? And so what is also happening, particularly in Southern California, is you have these unsuspecting homes that you would have no idea, that this is happening inside of until, something goes bad. And a lot of times, and I'm sure David can speak to this as well, the people who own the property know exactly what's going on inside of that property. And, I think Mayor Horvath and I share a common hatred for meth. because we have had to deal with some very horrendous cases of people dying, overdosing from meth. And, you know, from city to city, from state to state, law enforcement will tell you it is the #1 problem for them in terms of drugs. You know, and meth labs in Southern California are becoming more and more prevalent in our communities.
Yes, you're absolutely right. LA County has identified that meth is the drug that contributes to the most deaths. And so, you know, while we're talking about, you know, a business in terms of cannabis that has become a legal operation in many ways, when it's not legal, when it's not properly managed, when the oversight isn't there to make sure that it's being done in the right way, it can contribute to all of these other issues that are illegal, that contribute to other public health and safety issues, and quality of life issues. I know Jorge had mentioned he has a question as well.
I do. Thank you very much. I used to be a council member in the city of Southgate, and at one point, a dispensary popped up on our Tweety Mile on our main street, and it was incredibly frustrating because we felt like our hands are tied, like there wasn't much that we can do because they did it under the guise of a church, and that they weren't taking money; they were taking, I guess, tithing or donations to the church. And so, but we had to go through a process, and I can't really remember. It was towards the end of my tenure, but I remember it took weeks, if not months, to actually take action because we had to have people go in there, buy, and it was incredibly frustrating. I don't know if you can talk about that. It's been a few years now, so maybe the law has changed.
You know, and I guess I hear what you're saying, and I understand the concerns from a legal standpoint of First Amendment concerns, religious right to practice your religion. There are a few cases on this. It's People v. Payne. Payne. It actually speaks to this issue on point. A church is not allowed to distribute or sell cannabis. And many times these organizations that act like churches are actually selling cannabis under the guise of being religious. The law has become more enforced, and the law has become more understood by the courts, at least through the case law that's come through. And so in those situations, and that's a prime example where you are going to have to litigate with the operators. But when you bring the landlord into it, and you make the landlord stand up next to his tenant or next to her tenant and make them realize that they're going to be looped into the same circle, you'll see quicker compliance. That was the case of People v. Brom that Mr. Amoisley spoke to earlier. In that case, the landlord was actually found liable for $6 million in damages when the individual tenants decided to take off and abscond. They disappeared, but the landlord was left holding the bag. And as long as that message gets out there to landlords, that whether your tenant's going to act like they're a church or they're going to act like they're doing what they're doing, which is illegally selling narcotics, you will be left holding the bag. And for the city, it's important because even though the operator may be gone at that location in Southgate, that property still remains, and you can still collect the money that you spent on enforcement against the property, sell it, or against the landlord and make them pay.
And to add to what Mr. Welch just said, that's one of the things that makes civil action a very attractive option, even from an optical standpoint. It's one thing to be seeking to arrest church members and a pastor versus suing them in civil court to figure out what's going on in their operation. And so there's an added benefit to civil enforcement, this idea of lawsuits versus kind of criminal action to shut down operations that masquerade in all of these different ways.
Damon?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Horvath. I just wanted to comment on something that Jasmine had just raised about the meth houses. About maybe 6 to 8 months ago, I received a notification of a class action lawsuit that was being brought against Purdue Pharma by various entities. And it was about the opioid crisis and cities that had been impacted by it. And so we joined as a litigant in that litigation. And it was only after that that we started doing some research that we discovered the prevalence of opioid addiction within Compton. Ironically, in Southern California, opioid prescription prevalence in people over the age of 15 19.4% is here in Compton. And that was an astounding number for me to learn. I didn't learn that number through our law enforcement. And so I would encourage anyone who is with a municipality or another agency to seek out information like this, because there could be a problem in your city that you're not even aware of. Some of these meth houses are popping up in our city that I've recently become made aware of. And so obviously that complicates some of our issues in just in general, but to the extent that these same methods can be used in shutting down, because this is my understanding is that this process relates to all narcotics ventures, and that you can prevent an explosion from taking place in a way that you're just trying to keep people safe. This is a method of doing that as well. So again, I would encourage everyone to explore some of the data that may reveal a problem that you may not have even been aware of, so that you know, these can kind of be handled before they get out of control.
For those who can't see the chat, I wanted to let you all know that Natalie Salazar is going to follow up on how Los Angeles Crime Stoppers can assist, and she provided her email nsalazar@lacrimestoppers.org. So if you want to write to her as a resource for your community as well, she is available. Jasmine has also put her contact information in the chat as well. And for anyone who would like that information or any information from our presentation today, you can contact Marcel and contact city staff, and we'll make sure that you're able to get connected and be in touch. Before we conclude, just a couple of things. First, I want to thank our amazing panel for sharing their experience and information today. So grateful to know we have all of you on our side to help us in these efforts and can benefit from your experience. And thank you for being willing to share with Contract Cities today. And Mr. Imoisili, apologies for butchering your name on the way in. Hope I'll get better at it as we get to know each other. And thank you very much for your pass on that. And I promise to do better. I also wanted to give just a couple minutes to our incoming president to share a bit about what's going to happen on Saturday. So Mark Warnick, I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Madam President. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. As you know, I'll be installed this Saturday night virtually. And we have some great surprises, so I'm not going to tell you too much other than register. It is baseball theme, hence the Dodger hat and the Dodger background. So please, you know, wear your favorite jersey, wear your favorite hat. If you're an Angel fan, don't even bother coming on. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. If you are an Angel fan from Orange County, that's fine too. But please come on. It's going to be a good event. I will say that Senator Ben Allen is my installing officer, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And like I said, there'll be some surprises on there, so please come on. It's not going to be more than an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And if you haven't heard, we are moving our annual seminar, which is usually this week. Actually, as we speak, we would be golfing today, right now. In the desert. So we've kicked it to September 16th through the 19th, same place at the Esmeralda, Renaissance Esmeralda in Indian Wells. We'll be having the golf tournament that Thursday, and then the sessions on Friday and Saturday with the Marky Mark Funky Getaway Brunch. That was Marcel's idea on Sunday, but it'll be an opportunity to say thank you to Lindsay for all of her hard work last year. And we're going to actually combine the golf tournament with myself and Lindsay. So it'll be the Lindsay Mark golf tournament. We haven't figured out how we're going to do that, but we'll probably be riding on the golf carts, encouraging all the golfers on how to golf, or we might even golf too. I don't know yet. So with that, please register if you haven't yet. There was goodie bags that went out to the first 150 folks, actually goodie boxes. Some of you I know that are on here today have probably received them, or actually receiving them today and tomorrow. So thank you to all of our sponsors, our associate members for making that happen. It was a very cool surprise. And I look forward to seeing you all on Saturday night, 6 p.m. Thank you, Madam President.
Absolutely. And if we know what's good for us, I won't be anywhere near a golf course. Thank you all once again for leading us in this important discussion. Thank you for everyone's participation and joining us. This will be available on the Contract City's social media to be able to be shared and with your city colleagues and staff. To make sure they have access to the resources that were provided to us today. Once again, thank you to our panel and for the work that you do each and every day to keep our communities safe. And we'll see you on Saturday. Bye-bye.